Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG.
Hello and welcome to Invest Africa. I'm Nozipo Mbanjwa. Now, members of Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari's cabinet have officially been sworn in. This is more than 5 months after the president took office. President Buhari, who was elected in March, partly on a promise to tackle corruption and insecurity, vowed to select competent and clean individuals. But when the much-anticipated list was released, many were disappointed, asking whether the wait had been worth it and whether those who had been selected were the best that the country had to offer. To bring more insight into this debate, I'm now joined by Opeyemi Agbaje. He is the CEO of RTC Advisory. Joel Chimanda from JC Capital, and Arnold Dublin-Green is the head of fixed income from African Alliance, and he joins us from our Johannesburg studio. For you at home, thank you for making the time to join us. Don't forget that you can participate in this conversation. The hashtag is Invest Africa, following us at CNBC and CNBC Africa rather, and of course myself at The Real Nosy. Arnold, let's start off with just your impressions of what has been the difference that the investment community has seen in this Buhari administration.
I guess the difference in terms of Buhari coming in is more, Buhari has or compared to Jonathan, Buhari has a more of a no-nonsense approach. You know, he's coming with an anti-corruption banner, you know, cost-cutting, this is what the country needs. There is a feeling, there's an anticipation in the community that he will deliver. He seems to be quite forward, he seems to know what he is doing. I mean, he took his time with selecting a cabinet, which was a bit worrying. From our perspective, it felt like Nigeria was on a standstill when he did that.
Was that not supposed to create confidence in the process that we're really taking our time to get the best that the country has to offer?
I think it's 50-50. Most people felt, I mean, there was the idea that he has taken his time, but there was a sentiment and there was some I guess some rhetoric that maybe he's too old and he's too slow. And the country needs someone who can make decisions now and make it effective.
So there was an agility issue there.
Yes.
Opeyemi, let's bring the conversation to you, because Arnold is telling us that Buhari is really coming across as a no-nonsense man who's here to get things done. But what does the cabinet, what is their key messaging that's coming through? Looking at the men and women who have been selected, what does this cabinet represent?
Well, it's you asked about difference. The positive difference in relation to this cabinet is that, one, it's lean. We have only the constitutional minimum of 36. Historically, we've had 42, 49 ministers under the previous governments since return to civil rule. In terms of the constitution of the cabinet, well, there's a negative difference. Frankly, it took too much time, 6 months, and to form a cabinet, and it's hard to justify why it had to take that long. The names are not, frankly, in many cases, not unexpected, and it's not as if there are rocket scientists that have been put in the cabinet. So yeah, there's a focus on costs, on having the minimum required, which the Constitution says one from each state, so that's 36. But there's been some costs in terms of the time it has taken, and I don't think those costs have been justified so far.
So quite a number of key issues that you're bringing onto the table, but Joel, let's bring you into this conversation and perhaps give us a sense of, were there any surprise appointments that nobody really expected, surprise candidates that made it into the cabinet?
Well, my input is that as an outsider, I'm not a Nigerian. I'm an investor who brings investors into Nigeria. The 5 key interesting appointments for me is finance, trade and industry, state and petroleum, and the customs and excise. From an outside perspective, my observation is that President Buhari is unconventional. So what one ordinarily expects when a new president comes to cabinet, he's not really done. I can't speak specifically about the quantum of ministers appointed, the size of cabinet, but what is very clear for us from outside is that the question of governance and the institutional capacity that is necessary to address the endemic corruption problem appears to be on the priority list. And the challenges around oil and gas and the price of oil, from one looks at the focus around power, housing and works, one looks at industry and trade, one looks at the Ministry of Solid Minerals. I think the goal to diversify the economy and the revenue base appears to be reflected in the appointments that were made.
Joel, I just want to stay with you for a second because there are some key appointments that you've referred to that require further discussion. Let's start off with the Minister of Finance. This is something that the investment community surely is going to be looking at. Did the appointment of the Minister of Finance inspire confidence in the overall economic outlook for Nigeria?
Okay, there are three things for me that I note in the appointment of the Minister of Finance. Firstly, the fact that she is an investment banker by background and she understands capital markets and raising money and the dynamics of both global economy, regional economy and local economies. Nigeria is going to be facing significant challenges with regard to financing its infrastructure and the industrialization that will follow. So she has the background and understanding of the dynamics of raising significant amounts of money in the capital markets. The second thing is that she has a track record, from what I can understand, in the Ogun State as the Commissioner of Finance. So if she could achieve the level of success she achieved in Ogun State at a national level, I think she's going to be able to bring a different perspective and relevance at a national level. So when we look at it from outside, again, as an African or as an advisor that brings investors into Nigeria, I think she inspires confidence and there is a positive sentiment among the stakeholders that we have engaged in terms of the appointment of the Minister of Finance.
So it certainly sounds like it's a thumbs up and a vote of confidence in the Minister of Finance. But let's talk about another key appointment, Arnold, that of the President choosing to retain the oil ministry under his own portfolio. How has the investment community reacted to this? Is this something that's seen as a positive move, or is it something that's worrisome?
I mean, look, it's mixed. It's mixed. Oil is the lifeblood of Nigeria. Nigeria generates over 70% of its revenue from oil. I can understand, I guess most people can understand why he would make this position his own. Because, you know, it's the lifeblood, oil is Nigeria. And from the past with corruption and everything happening in oil, it is worrying. And like I said at the beginning, Buhari has an anti-corruption, no-nonsense approach. But it's interesting because Obasanjo did it a few years ago.
Right.
He, you know, between 1999 and 2007, I think for 2 or 3 years, he made himself, I guess, the oil minister. But with Buhari, he's placed technocrats, a junior oil minister, someone who knows how things work and who understands the technical aspects of it. And I guess in that sense, there is the confidence that he will hand over the technical side of things to this technocrat, and he will take over overseeing everything else. The other, I guess, the worry is going from Obasanjo, where there was no transparency. You know, no one knew who took what oil block and who did what. And that's the worry with Buhari doing the same. But I guess the market and the world and everyone else is hoping that he will have his same approach in the oil industry, and with him being the overseer of the oil ministry.
Well, we've just scratched the surface with just looking at some of the key appointments that the investment community would be focusing on. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we're really going to dig a little bit deeper into what this cabinet really represents for the Nigerian economy. We'll see you in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Invest Africa. in our conversation today, we are focusing on President Muhammadu Buhari's appointment of his particular cabinet and really getting to understand what does this cabinet have to offer the Nigerian economy. Still with me, my guest, Opeyemi Agbaje, the CEO of RTC Advisory, joining us from Lagos, Joel Chimanda from AGH Capital, also joining us from Lagos, and Arnold Dublin-Green, head of fixed income from African Alliance, here in our Johannesburg studio. Opeyemi, I just want you to pick up on some of the comments that Arnold made before we went to break, and this, of course, the retention of the oil ministry under President Buhari. What is your assessment of this particular move, and what kind of messaging does it send to the international community?
Well, I like the Minister of State very well. I think he's extremely competent, capable, has all the right ideas, but I don't like this inclination of Nigerian presidents to retain the oil ministry. I think it detracts from the message that we want to diversify from oil, and it ends up being something that is viewed more politically, and a suggestion around patronage rather than so it would have been better, in my view, to allow the minister who is the expert, who has the right policy framework and coverage and instincts about what the industry needs to run it. But, well, perhaps an argument could be made because of the need to deal with corruption. The president wants to have some oversight in that regard. So, but for me, it detracts from the message that we want to de-emphasize oil. We want to focus on building a more diversified and more robust economy.
Opeyemi, I just want to stay with you for a moment, because we know that the reality of what the Nigerian economy finds itself in is a world of an oil price that's hovering below $50 per barrel. What does this mean for the economic-facing ministries? I know being lean was a key theme, but does it necessitate that there's going to be a different approach necessary to move Nigeria forward, and perhaps a different policy approach that we might not have seen before?
Well, frankly, it means that we need a whole new paradigm that focuses on private capital, that focuses on, like I said earlier, diversification, that focuses on reducing some wasteful expenditure, such as the fuel subsidies that we spend an average of ₦1 trillion on every year. Frankly, and that's my main worry, there's been, it seems, a reluctance to embrace markets, a preference for a statist approach. That's what I detect, at least from the first 6 months of the Buhari presidency. We've refused the decision to remove subsidies. I thought that was something we needed to do immediately in May. We've refused to privatize the refineries that are producing at 2 or 4% capacity. We've not taken the right decisions, I suspect, in relation to exchange rates. So there seems to be a preference for control and for a state-led approach. Now, that is completely contrary to the reality we face. And I suspect that, using the example of the oil industry, I suspect that the technical people around the presidency have a different instinct from the president in this regards, in relation to subsidies, privatization of refineries, and all of that. So they're going to have a major job across sectors, across trade and investment, across petroleum, across finance, persuading the president. So a lot of the selling they're going to be doing, I think, will be upwards to their boss.
That's a really interesting take, Opeyemi. And Joel, I want to come to you because, again, this issue of can President Buhari take the counsel of the ministries and the technocrats that he has surrounded himself with? What is your sense as an investor standing from the outside, whether the president can take counsel, and is it important that he's able to have a listening ear to those who might just be better experts in their different ministries?
Okay, my comment is going to touch on 3 different points. Firstly, the question of the president getting involved in the Ministry of Oil. Secondly, the question of what I see as the challenge Nigeria faces if the issues are going to be resolved. And thirdly, the question of diversification of the revenue streams in terms of the Nigeria economy and some of the people that have been appointed, which send positive signal around what they may come up with, which we can only make or tell in the next 3 to 6 months. I think what I read into President Buhari involving himself in the Ministry of Petroleum is that, firstly, there's a cancer that needed to be resolved. So it's all about strategy. I don't believe that he actively wants to involve himself in running the ministry, but the issues that need to be cleared historically around corruption is something that he will require close oversight with regard to. Secondly, the understanding of what will happen to the oil revenues in his first 6 to 12 to 18 months of office is the key revenue driver that his government is going to have revenue source to execute projects. So I believe that he probably wants to maintain a close eye as to what happens in that specific ministry and department. So if one were to look at it dispassionately, and if one was to say President Buhari is the CEO of a company, I think strategically it's a burning platform that there is issues that need to be resolved, and he's brought it closer to himself. If I look at the question of revenue diversification, I think if you look at the outgoing Nigerian Minister of Agriculture, who is now the President of Africa Development Bank, there is a number of initiatives that have happened in Nigeria in a number of states, escalating and prioritizing agriculture as a source of revenue, as a creation of jobs, etc. When one looks at the privatization that was done of the power companies, both the generation and distribution company, Nigeria has 10,000 megawatts installed capacity, of which 4,000 megawatts currently is delivered onto consumers. The challenge for Nigeria is that if you look at South Africa as an example, they have 50 million people and 50,000 megawatts. So they have a megawatt for every million population. Nigeria, if one was to use that benchmark, would require to have anything between 100 and 150,000 megawatts. Without power, there is things that can't happen in terms of industrialization. So I believe the appointment of the ex-governor of Lagos State as the Minister of Power, in terms of the way he thinks and his leadership style and some of the solutions that he brought to Lagos State as a government, I believe that he is the right person, or he is a person that will be able to address the question, how do we move from 10 to 20 to 40 to 50 to 100,000 megawatts? If we come to the Ministry of Solid Minerals, Nigeria actually is a significant resource, has a significant resource of minerals. But because of the historical focus around oil and gas, some of these other minerals have not really been looked at nor developed. And I believe with the appropriate minister focusing on solid minerals, it could be coal, it could be gold, it could be any of the other related minerals, even iron ore, the ones that will enable creation of a heavy metal industry.
Right.
I believe that that is an appropriate focus area.
Joel, I think what you've done is really given us a great oversight in terms of some of the key economic ministries. But I want to touch on this issue of privatization of power and this perception that this is somewhat has been derailed by the appointment of Buhari. And I want to bring this to you because, Arnold, what we're told by the Buhari administration that spending on infrastructure is going to go up by at least 50%. So this is going to be a big part of what the legacy of this cabinet is going to be. Does it have the leadership, one, to raise the capital that's going to be required, and two, to execute on these projects?
Personally, I believe it does. I think if you look at the Minister of Power, Housing and Works, who is Fashola, who was the former governor of Lagos, one could say he gave Lagos a facelift. So if you went to Lagos 10, 15 years ago, compared to Lagos now, a totally different place, and most of it is thanks to Fashola. I think he can deliver. I think it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a huge project. Oil, which is the major revenue generator for Nigeria, is trading at $40 odd per barrel. I guess this is also where other heads have to kind of come in, or other hands have to come on the table and have to figure out another way and alternative means for Nigeria to generate revenue to go into infrastructure. I do believe that Fashola is up for the job, up for the task. it's just a matter of other ministries, whether it's the Ministry of Finance coming in and everyone kind of figuring out another way to generate income. Joe mentioned agriculture. I think that's huge for Nigeria. It's a huge, huge opportunity. One can see this as an opportunity for Nigeria to diversify. Oil being this low, it's a wake-up call, in my opinion.
Well, on that note, it's a wake-up call, and it certainly seems that the biggest thing that this cabinet needs to get right is identifying new revenue streams, and particularly from a diversified economy, to really make sure that Nigeria is well positioned in the new economic reality that it finds itself in. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. A very big thank you to my guests for also making the time to join us. Opeyemi Agbaje, the CEO of RTC Advisory, who joined us from Lagos, Joel Chimanda from AGH Capital, who also joined us from Lagos, and of course I was with Arnold Dublin-Green, head of fixed income from African Alliance here in Johannesburg. For you at home, if you want to find out where to put your money in Africa, where to invest in Africa, please keep watching the show, but most importantly, tell us which markets and which sectors you would like us to look at. That's by sending us a tweet. The hashtag is Invest Africa, following me at The Real Nosy, and of course at CNBC Africa. From myself and the Invest Africa team, it's goodbye.
Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG. Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG.